Hello and welcome to the Hindu Spale, a podcast where we explore pressing questions of public importance guided by insights from experts. I'm Ramya Kannan, your host for this episode. This week, we discuss what role social media plays in determining a youngster's self worth. Young entrepreneur Misha Agarwal reportedly died by suicide earlier this week after losing social media followers. And since we're making a reference to suicide, we will provide some helplines that can assist those with emotional disturbances. Back to our subject. The tragic news of Misha's death was confirmed through her official Insta handle, and later her sister spoke about the increasing burden Misha had faced because of a falling count of followers on social media. There is no doubt that social media is here to stay and has a huge role to play in our lives, unless you're that specific kind of hermit crab that lives under the rocks. By holding up a world that seems perfect and fickle with its devotion, social media can take a toll on mental health, particularly that of youngsters. On the other side, we have the Netflix series Adolescence that was frankly scary in the way it unpeeled the sort of subterranean language that adults seem completely unaware of incel on campuses or toxic role models for children. Today, we will discuss this range of issues with experts in the field, and hopefully, we will have a playbook of sorts for parents to try and implement when their children get onto social media, because at some point they are going to. Without further ado, today we have with us Dr. Meghna Singhal, clinical psychologist and parenting coach. She is a trauma informed psychotherapist who specializes in couple conflict and child and adolescent mental health. She is also on Instagram as at the therapist mommy. With a degree in clinical psychology from NIMHANS and a postdoctorate in parenting from the University of Queensland, Australia, she says she spent the last 15 years doing what most therapists aren't trained for: holding real relationships in real crisis. She's also an internationally certified Triple P positive parenting program educator. Welcome today, Dr. Meghna. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this.
We also have with us Sannuti Suresh, Program Coordinator, Healing and Support Services. She is with Tulir, the Center for the Prevention and Healing of Child Sexual Abuse in Chennai, India. Sannuti is a psychologist based in Chennai, has been working with young people and children, particularly in the areas of sexuality, gender and caste-based violence, child sexual violence, mental health, within communities and clinical settings. She works with Tulir, where she assists the team in addressing cases of CSV and advocacy efforts with government stakeholders in the child protection system in Tamil Nadu. Thank you so much, Sanati, for coming here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to see what we will be discussing. I found the topic itself very relevant to what's been happening, and yeah, looking forward.
Absolutely. So let's plunge straight into the questions. Dr. Meghna, do you think that social media is changing how people form their identity? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think social media, I don't think is just a platform anymore. I think it's become a mirror and sometimes almost like a magnifying glass. And I think, you know, uh, young people, particularly, the way they are seen, the way they are shaped, and even scrutinized, right? It's holding a big mirror to them. And you talked about forming identity formation is such an important process that happens at this stage, but the problem is that identity is no longer being formed in the quiet privacy of our bedrooms or classrooms anymore. It's for young people particularly, it's being performed, it's being edited, and it's being posted. And we're in a stage where uh, external validators are the likes and the shares, and the questions that many young people are asking is not who I am, but what version of me will get the most approval. So I think that's pretty tricky. And I think it's also uh, it's scary because I think the line between authentic self-expression and a very algo driven self curation is blurring.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense the way you've explained it. Samnati, do you want to comment on the same question? Do you think social media is changing how young people form their identity?
Yeah, no, I think I completely second what Meghna has said. But in addition to that, I was also um, wanting to add that, especially with young people that I work with, I mean, I think it's important to know that um, these are not separate kind of spheres that they are navigating between social media and their own selves and their world. They're all one thing, unlike for a lot of us that were born and started lives without the social media being so inherent in our lives. For them, it is melded into their daily existence. So yes, of course it is changing how they form identity, and not just of course the risks of algo driven methods of what is most, uh, what is most approving of as per the world's view of you online is one element. But the other thing is that you're constantly riffing off what everybody else believes is cool or amazing, or has the most kinds of likes or comments. So in that sense, basically they're doused into a whole arena where everything is about presenting yourself in a certain way, but there are no spaces to be able to reflect or think about what any of this means. So yeah, I think it's just become melded into their daily existence. So yeah, I worry a lot.
Right. Right. I hear you there, Sanuti. And I think it's a very pertinent point that we are actually looking at the world differently from how they are looking at the world. So coming down to the whole concept of influencers, are influencers guilty of creating this plastic happy world, where subscriber count, growing subscriber count is the primary gratification? Sometimes truth telling or being deliberately or incidentally glossing over things is just another casualty that we'll have to put up with. Since Dr. Meghna, since you are on Insta, and I suppose you are an influencer yourself, I'd like you to answer this first.
First of all, I would like to make a disclaimer. I don't see myself as one. I don't see myself as an influencer. So I try to stay away from that label as far as possible. But yeah, to answer your question, I think in many cases, yes. But I wouldn't say it's just the influencers who are guilty. I think the entire ecosystem rewards this performance, this show, and we punish vulnerability unless, of course, it's like beautifully packaged, it's palatable and it's brandable. And I think a lot of the so-called influencers do play a very high stakes game, right? It's all for visibility. And of course the algo isn't neutral, right? It does favor these glossy aesthetics over what is really a gritty truth. So yes and no, but I think obviously truth doesn't sell unless it's packaged right. And that's very that's a very big distortion. So yes and no, influencers are guilty, but I think it's the entire ecosystem. And there are a whole lot of these influencers like this Masoom Minawala, right? Or Komal Pandey, who like for example this clean girl aesthetic that they for example promote, selling expensive skincare routines and curated lifestyles, right? uh, where is the truth? Where is the struggle with financial stress or family pressure or struggles with mental health? It's all being edited out, right? In favor of this commercially appealing version of self. So they are able to do this because the algo and the ecosystem rewards them for it. So yes, it's the entire ecosystem, and I think influencers are just a symptom.
Right. Yeah, I think that gives us some perspective. Sanuti, do you want to come in on this?
So I also wanted to add. I mean, I know that Misha is. I mean, she was an adult. She's 25, but there are also a lot of child influencers online, and there's this show right now on Netflix. Called, okay, I'm forgetting the name at the moment, but then it talks about influencers who are children, who are in some ways also pushed by their parents to put up different types of content online, including YouTube and other places. And one of the problems there, and yes, of course, the primary gratification can become follower count because it's connected to your parent feeling that, okay, if you're doing well online, it means that you have more followers, then you get monetized. And I feel like it's even more dangerous when you have an adult who's using a child to become an influencer. And Bad Influence is the show that I was talking about, the dark side of kid influencing. I wouldn't say, to answer specifically to this question, I wouldn't say that influencers are the only ones guilty of doing this. Everyone is trying to create aspirational versions of the world and in some ways themselves. I feel it's scarier when it's a young person who is just in the phase of, becoming an adolescent, because you are specifically thinking about yourself, and you're specifically wanting peers to accept you. You want to be popular, you want to be fun, you want to be a person who is around other people. And then it kind of it magnifies, and uh, it makes it even more exacerbated than the situation, say, when you don't have media and you're just like with three friends hanging out at your school. So I do think that it becomes even more intensified when it's a really young person and not, say, a 26, 27-year-old. It becomes harder for them to navigate world outside the online space. And what is the online space? It becomes all one thing, and gratification becomes something else, because so much of your own sense of self is connected to the external.
Right. Yeah, that also makes a lot of sense. I know we did talk about this whole influencer aspect, but even before influencers got into Instagram, I think it was primarily an algo that provided these lovely happy images of people, no, not a cheer in their lives, and that itself is somewhat suspicious. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us about how these on is there like any study that you've encountered? How exactly do these online trends of perfect images influence the body image or self-expression, particularly of children, but also of youngsters in this case? Sanuti, do you want to go on this first?
Yes, sure. I feel like lots of examples when it talks about, when specifically about the idea of perfection and the body and self expression. Um, because I remember there's this whole trend at one point where thigh gaps were a thing, and people so basically it was about having really shapely thighs, but having a gap between the two thighs. And this led to a lot of young people wanting to get the thigh gap. And then it moved to some other body kind of body feature. uh, and you'd have a celebrity and then some other influencer talking about how they have it and they got it in this way, and it would be some kind of dangerous plastic surgery method. And different countries, of course, have different accessibility to plastic surgery. Like South Korea in some ways has a lot more, like young people have a lot more access to plastic surgery there than here in India. But it was scary for me to see, even when I was speaking to a young person who is, say, 15, 17, 22, the minuscule attention to their face, and the fact that the left side doesn't match the right side, and the fact that you can spend so much of detail, just like Meghna mentioned, the magnification of using the device and social media specifically was seen when I was working with people in that age range, and continue to have that this thing about how I need to be, what I need to say, how I need to say it, and it's not cool when I say it in this way, or if I don't know a certain type of language, then I'm going to be in the out group. um, there is a very strong influence in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanati, for that. I want to go over to Dr. Meghna now and ask you about your practice. Do you have children who come in with this image, this perfect image, that is projected on social media, and worrying that they are not themselves a part of this perfect image?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when Sanuti was speaking, I was reminded of all my adolescent clients who have a very distorted body image, and they're in therapy because of it. Because a distorted body image is at the core of a whole lot of eating disorders. And currently, I'm seeing a lot of teens and young adults who, you know, th- what they see out there it shapes their very self-worth. It's so interesting. They tell me that, logically we know that this is an airbrushed kind of a reality. Logically we know this is a filtered body, but it still influences them, right? And there's a lot of internalized shame. There's a lot of what starts off as inspiration becomes very shameful, to them. So yes, I am seeing this in my clinical practice a lot. um, the examples that Sanati was mentioning, the thigh gap, I've had clients who've been influenced by that and who've tried to achieve that. There is this whole I think it's called That Girl morning routine, which took over the Indian Gen Z reels, and it was all about these diets and gym routines and rigid schedules. And of course, at that time, it was heavily criticized by many Indian psychologists, right? Because it promoted unrealistic ideals. But it obviously would leave a young person feeling not enough. That if they didn't wake up at 5 a.m. and drink lemon juice and journal and have abs by 17 years of age, they're nobodies. So yes, I in my clinical practice, what we're talking about, the conversation that we're having here, is exactly playing out in the way that we most fear.
Right, that's truly scary thing. And how far do you think people will go towards, getting this ideal body type? Because unlike in the past, where children were entirely dependent on their parents for resources, in this case, I think children are able to sort of have access to a bounty of resources, even money. So is it possible that they push that, leveraging the access to resources, they push that to achieve this ideal body image? You think that is possible?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to your question, how far will they go? I mean, I don't think anybody can answer that, but I think the whole point is that the whole ideal itself keeps shifting, right? Someday it's the thigh gap, and someday it's that morning routine, and someday it's abs, and it keeps shifting. So and it's all dangerous. I mean, even the viral trends, which were, which became like the blue whale challenge. I don't know if you've heard of it. This went viral a few years back, and it was all about completing a series of steps which ultimately resulted in you, the last step was you just taking your own life, right? And it was a viral trend which a lot of people were succumbing to. So how far will we go? I don't think there's an answer to that. If we see the trend, if we see what's happening to our people, to us, to our youngsters in the last few years, I think we will ultimately go till our doom. And that's all, I think. Because I don't know how we can predict this, but it doesn't look good.
I I just want to add to what Meghna has also shared. The thing about the body is, I mean, one of the trends is also that a lot of it is about sexualized expressions of the self, right? And I keep wondering. I mean, I know that one of the most predominant explorative forms of identity for a young person, a teenager, and someone slightly older, is the sexual aspect, like what sexuality looks like, what sexual expression is, how it is expressed to the body. It's interesting how so many of the trends latch onto that specific bit, like what body is the most sexy, what type of feature of the body is the most sexy, or it is in this form, which is where it's like a challenge of, oh, nobody can do this, you, if you are this, then you're the best, kind of thing. Like Blue Whale was one of those where it kept pushing you to prove that you could be that daring, and that daring um, is a is a trait that is seen as the most interesting to have in some way. But the underlying aspects of insecurity or pain or suffering, none of those were being discussed and are not being discussed actually a lot. And that is what is scary, because it's about presenting yourself as being, either alpha male or sigma male now, or for a woman being, ultra sassy, very sexual, but at the same time ungettable. All these kinds of formations of identity are the ones that are getting presented, and there is no dialogue, no facilitation, no conversation around what it means to be that, how it can be this or that, what are the ways in which it manifests, and the implications of this versus something else, none of those.
Right. So that sort of segues into my next question, which is, I can say, came right out of Adolescence, the Netflix series. How do we keep tabs on the social media use of teens? And more importantly, how do we know that we are making right sense of what they're doing online? Because in Netflix, how the adult is completely way off the mark when he's interpreting what the son and and the victim, in this case a young girl, is doing online. Do you want to take this, Hanati?
Sure, Ramya. I think it's the truth is you can't really ever keep tabs on the social media use of a teenager, in the sense that I think it's important for us to accept that as a parent or as an adult, you don't have control. Right now, the people who need to take responsibility are those who are running these platforms, and I mean, there is a way for them to do those bits, the due diligence there. But I think more than that, and this comes out very beautifully even in the show, is that you can see the vacuum that these young people are in, vacuum of almost no adult conversation in their lives. How has that vacuum been built? I think that's an important question to ask. If you don't have any other person apart from your peers, and the adults that you are listening to and speaking to are people online, where are the real life adults? The people who are not online. What are they doing? Why aren't they the ones occupying the conversational spaces with the young person? And the last episode shows a bit of that, about how they feel like, oh, they wish they had spent more time with him or engaged with him. And I do think that that's happening a lot with young people today. They spend a lot of time online, and I feel like there has to be some way to close that vacuum of communication, because it's being filled up by something else that is not regulated, that is not also fair, because we are dumping, in some ways, young people into this sea of so much information and access, without them having any kind of discretionary lens about what is authoritative information, what is information that is really going to be closest to what the world is. And ideally, you need that. It's not like they can run the world without guidance and help and support from adults. And the vacuum is something that, I don't know how. Like, I think all of us as adults in the world have to begin to think about when we are interacting with young people. It is about us taking the initiative to talk more, spend more time, hang out, in general with them.
Indeed. That makes a lot of sense because I have a teen, and and a lot of this makes sense to me because of the way there are interactions amongst youngsters in school, outside of school. They meet a lot online, which is something that I don't think any other generation ever did. I'd like to go to Dr. Meghna now and ask if you would like to comment on this.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with Sanuti. I don't think keeping tabs is the point. I don't think keeping tabs on the social media use of teens is such a good idea at all. It's a very surveillance kind of a perspective. Whereas I think what we need to do is shift from surveillance to connection, because monitoring social media, like when we do that as parents, from a place of fear, it actually doesn't work. It actually backfires, right? Because it only encourages the young people to hide what they're doing online. In fact, what we need is a better, stronger parent child connection. What we need is parents coming at their children from a place of curiosity and presence and trust, because young people speak a very different language, like it was shown in Netflix series, right? The series called Adolescence, what we're talking about. um, I mean, I work with adolescents all the time, and yet I did not know half the emojis that they that different kinds of colors of heart have different meanings, right? So the young people speak a very different language online. They use memes, they use these emojis, they have these private stories. Of course, they have finstars. A lot of my adolescent clients tell me about finstars. Finstars are basically an alternative account, Instagram account that you have. So one is a legit account that you show to the whole world, that your parents know you have, and then parents think that they're following you online on Instagram. So they're like, okay, I'm monitoring my child's activity, but guess what? Your child has another account which is goes by a completely different name, and it's called a Finsta, and that's where they do actually carry out a whole lot of their activities, right? So as parents, as teachers, I think as educators, we need to learn their language. We if we really want to learn their language and decode what they're saying, we need to stop translating it into our own fears, and we need to start listening with context. So instead of asking what are you doing online, I think a better question might be, what part of you feels most seen when you like something, when you like a post, or when you share your own post, right? So I'll give you an Indian example, with regard to this gap that Sanuti was also talking about, right? So there is this influencer called Krisha Kapila, and when she got divorced, I think about a year back or something, she got divorced. A lot of young people showed up online and they started posting their views on, divorce and individuality and boundaries. And there were a lot of adults at that time, I'm sure there were parents as well, who completely misunderstood this, and they said, oh, this is such a moral decay and this is such disrespect. And that is the problem. We are speaking two different languages. We are completely not understanding the context that these young people are coming from. I don't think the idea is to label it as anything. I think the idea is to approach it with curiosity. What does divorce mean to you? What does individuality mean to you? Right? I mean, all over Instagram now there is, oh, this is a red flag. Oh, this person is toxic. This is a he's a narc. But really, what does it mean to you? Instead of saying that, oh my god, you are so immature and you don't understand anything, and you have no clarity, I think we need to start having some different conversations for sure. And I think we instead of seeing everything as a rebellion, I think we need to start seeing these young people from their own lens as well. Only then we'll be able to bridge the gap.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, both as a mother of a teen, but also in terms of trying to understand the language and, speaking two different things entirely, and, a sort of miscommunication happening. That is so real. Sanuti, do you want to come in now for something?
Yeah, just quickly adding to what Meghna was saying earlier about the language. I do think that it's important to accept that the languages will always be different in some way or the other. That that's what languages are. Like over time, different generations speak differently. But then accepting that we speak in different ways about similar things, there can be a way to still communicate, and that we are not limited actually by the languages that we use. I think that's really important, because it's not that, okay, they're speaking a different language and we're speaking a different language, so there's no way to connect. It's also that communication is beyond that, and all of these are just signifiers. Like words are signifiers of the signified things that all of us actually constantly are engaging with in the world. We were adolescents once, we and they are soon going to be adults, so it's all, I think it's important for everyone to be able to see that we're on similar ground in some way, in similar pathways, while of course uniquely different in their own way. But there are points of connection for everything.
Yeah, certainly. That also brings in the perspective. Life is in a flux, and adolescents of today are adults of tomorrow.
Hmm.
So that sort of brings a connect. And I would like to ask if we have some sort of a playbook, a list of things that parents, schools, and teachers maybe can do, because and of course peers, but mostly if we have understood this social media is here to stay, and there's no way we're going to be able to prevent our children from being influenced by social media, is there something that we can do to prepare them for this world? Sanati?
Yes, I mean, lots can be done to prepare. Um, in some ways, that I think there is a forgetting of thoughts about, or I think forgetting is one way, one feature of it. The other feature is also that we don't really know what we are kind of uh, having to face with things online, because it's constantly changing and access is very unregulated at the level of, say, third party entities that are allowing various things to happen, right? So I know that a lot of games allow for certain kinds of uh, interactions that are sexual, that a child should not have to deal with. Like, for instance, there are cases already of rape in the metaverse, which is dangerous, and obviously that particular company should not have even written the code to allow for something like that to happen online, right? But I think it's important when you, as someone who is working with young people, or is a young person and is engaging with devices and internet online, it is important to be able to understand that the internet is a space that is not all safe, and that there are ways to be safe. And that means that conversations have to happen that may not always be comfortable. It may be about sex, or what it means when someone is writing to you about expressing yourself in a way that you don't want to express yourself. You don't have to feel obligated to do that. Like, these very, very basic things that may feel like, okay, isn't it obvious? But it's not obvious. Like, for instance, even the idea of privacy is different when it is online, because what is privacy normally earlier was just, okay, you go into a room and you shut the door, you're private. But that's not how it is online. You can be very private in your room but very not private online. And I feel like all of these things need to be worded and negotiated in ways that may not be vocabularized at the moment. But then it's okay to find articulation with the young person that is your child, or is your student, or is maybe a really young sibling. And a lot of it has to do with just communicating more, which is just, I know it sounds very simplistic, but I think that that is the only way.
Right. Yeah, it may that speaks to me as well. Dr. Meghna, do you want to come in on this?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'll just add on to what Sanuti's already mentioned. I think, see, the problem is that I think most of the parents, most of, schools, we were never taught how to emotionally exist online, right? And so we're playing it by the year. We're learning on the job, right? So I think we need to get come together and co-create a kind of a digital literacy that just goes beyond saying, hey, don't share passwords and be careful with strangers online. I mean, I think we need to really get into teaching emotional resilience, to our young people, how to handle rejection, what to do when you're triggered by someone's perfect post, or how to recognize when you're doom scrolling as a form of escape, right? I think these are the conversations we need to be having, amongst each other, because I don't think even adults are immune to this, honestly. I mean, we're talking about young people being prepared for social media, but are adults. So, what kind of conversations will we have if we ourselves are clueless? So, I think we all need to come together and have these conversations, but also understand, you know, uh, that we're doing this with one aim, that, you know, it is not a mechanical activity. When we say that we want to be prepared for dealing with social media, it is a very emotional activity, right? And so I think recognizing that needs to be the first step.
Yes, that is very well said, Dr. Meghna. In this, when you look at an atmosphere or an ecosystem that is, enabling, um, Sanuti, do you think that the social media organizations, social media companies, if you will, can do anything can do more about this, about keeping the world safe for children?
Yes, most definitely. I feel like they have a lot more responsibility than I think they're willing to admit at the moment. Uh, because I mean, how do I explain this? I mean, the fact that an online space doesn't exist without a human and many other people in a team coming together to write it up, you can decide what exists and what cannot exist in it. And if you're allowing for something to happen there, then, or rather turning a blind eye, and you're choosing not to report, or you're choosing to make it possible for, like, for example, this is an old example. There's this game called GTA, and it's an old game which used to have various versions. So you have a young person, a child version, a teen version, and an adult version. No teen is going to go in the teen version. They always choose the adult version. Okay, this always happens. Now, in the adult version, there are various parts in the game which, there are tasks basically, where this person who is the avatar for the person who's playing is asked to accost a prostitute and then, engage in certain types of sexual activity. Like, that is a task. Now, how is this allowed in a game? And this is GTA, which is very it's very common. It's a very, nobody knows these games. Like, as a parent, if if I bought this game because my child wanted it, the child doesn't know that this is going to be in the game. The adult doesn't know because they haven't tried the game. And then you come upon this, what to do? So, like Meghna mentioned, it would be important for the young person to feel that, okay, hey, I can talk to my parent about, okay, I saw this, I don't know what this means, I'm just really like confused. Okay. And ideally, the environment for conversation needs to exist. But the responsibility, this is post the fact. The responsibility here is in on the, game makers and the people who have built this structure. And for the simple fact that right now, online spaces and stranger danger with respect to CSAM and child sexual abuse and sextortion is not coming from people who are unknown. There are people who are known, who like, basically grooming that happens online through persons who you already know. So your guards are much lower than online anyway, because of the anonymity that it provides you. And on top of it, if you're a young person and you want to present yourself as, sexually acceptable, or someone who may be interested in you, it's already putting you in so much of vulnerability. And all the more reason why someone who is, say, running a company that engages with the online space has to be very careful, because anonymity really reduces the way the accountability that someone applies on themselves when they are doing something online. And that's something you don't see in other spaces. Like, when someone enters a room, you know this person, you have like you clock their face, you know who they are. You might not know their names, but they're there. But if someone enters a room online, you don't know. It's just some random username, and things happen. How do you describe it? So yes, I feel like it has a undue I think, a very, very high stake responsibility for social media companies and people who are running these spaces, even people who run and write code for games online, which a lot of young people use.
Yeah, thank you for that, Samriti. Dr. Meghna, are you here with us on this? Do you think that these companies have to do much more than they are doing today?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with everything that Sanuti said. I would just like to add an example of what happened recently. There's this lady on LinkedIn. She made a post. She's the mother of teen herself, I think two teens. I don't know her. I'm not connected with her, but her post went viral on LinkedIn recently, and she had tagged the CEO of YouTube, I think Neil Mohan, and said that, can you please stop these shorts, YouTube shorts, because they are just this bottomless bowl phenomena wherein my kids just go on consuming these shorts. And what is up with that? Like, this is not okay. Um, they're losing hours, and the kind of content that they're being exposed to, it's not okay, right? So her post went viral. I think it clocked in some 4,000 likes and hundreds of comments. And I agree that it is the ethical responsibility of these companies. But unfortunately, we are living in a world where this is drowned out by profits, by capitalism. And I don't know, but I think capitalism is a pretty tough nut to crack. So I think, I mean, this is the way I look at it, because I'm a clinician and I'm a parenting educator. I absolutely think that we need to, you know, put the ethical responsibility on these companies. But until that happens, I don't think we should sit around and wait, and be passive. And I think we absolutely, yeah, have a responsibility as adults to do many things. We can, like, when Sanati was giving the example of the game, which honestly shocked me. I did not know that. It's horrible. I'll look it up. But it's disgusting. But when she was giving the example of this game, there's this one strategy that I tell the parents in my parenting workshops, and that is called co-viewing and co-playing. So okay, so when I speak to parents of particularly teens and young people, and I ask them, okay, can you tell me, हम अपने बच्चे के कंजम्पशन से, मीडिया कंजम्पशन से बहुत परेशान है. We are very very scared that we don't know what the child is watching, what kind of movies, what kind of music, what kind of friends they have. Okay, so I ask them a simple question. Your child is into gaming. When was the last time you played the game that your child likes with them? Your child loves watching movies. When was the last time you actually watched the movie with them? Your child loves Snapchat. When was the last time you used Snapchat? And there's a reason why I say that. It's because unless you are in touch with your child's inner world, unless you might hate the kind of music that they like, and you might hate the kind of gaming that they do, and you might hate Snapchat or whatever else that your child is into, unless you learn the ins and outs of the apps and the movies and the games that your child is into, you cannot build inroads into your child's inner world. And so therefore you are au- automatically cut off from them. And so I think it is our responsibility to be in touch with our child's inner world, right? And I think this is what we is in our hands. See, ethical responsibility of these companies might not be directly in our hands. Yes, we can, through a whole lot of activism, and we can create a lot of noise around it, and all of that. But what will happen with that ultimately, I don't know. But I think we should have a more inner locus of control, and focus on what are the things that are in directly in our hands. And definitely being in touch with our kids is. So this is what I would just add to what Sanati was saying, that I don't think we should sit around waiting for capitalist, very very profit driven companies to take ethical responsibility. I think we should take the reins of our children's lives, their health, in our hands.
Just to add to that also, Meghna, I don't, of course, believe that we have to wait around, but it is important for us to know that there is lack of control, that you can't actually rein everything in your child's life. There will be inner worlds that you will not be invited into. So, as a adult educator, someone who works with young people, or a parent, I think it's really, really important for them to be able to create conducive environments or spaces for young people and children to come to them and say, hey, this happened. And so, definitely, yes, it's important to also know what online spaces are like. That means a lot of educating of the self is needed as a adult or a educator or a parent. You need to know what your young person is engaging with in the world, but also having conversations about, like, okay, this thing happened online. I was on Instagram and I saw this. It was so weird when this happened. What do you think? Have you ever come across something like this? Just opening up a question with them, starting with conversations around that. It may not be you actually becoming a friend with them on Snapchat. It may not take that form. But if you are also, like you said, the word, I love that word, you're co-playing or co-experiencing an app or an online space, maybe not as your child's friend, but also there, and you notice this happening and you bring it up and say, oh, this happened, like that was really weird. What do you do when that happens? Isn't that scary? Like, I felt this, what did you feel? So I think having that space where the parent or the young or the adult initiates a conversation that may seem like the young person doesn't have vocabulary for, is something that is really important as well.
I completely agree. And if I may just add a little example here, it's a very tiny example, but it exactly matches what you're saying, Sanuti. When you say that it's the parents taking a lead and having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. A very small example, but a very relatable example is when, say, everybody's in the family is sitting and watching a movie together or a show together, and a kissing scene comes on the screen. What do you do? Do you turn away in embarrassment? Do you switch the channel? Do you walk away? Like, what do you do? Or do you use that moment to actually have a conversation with your kid? Yes, it is embarrassing, it is awkward, but you know what? Do you think that that girl moved away because she was not interested? Did you hear the person ask whether are you okay with this kiss? Like these questions, they can be just questions, right? Without any intent to lecture or preach, they can just be questions, like you said, right? What does that make you feel? I felt this. What does that do for you? Right? So I think yeah, I think these are very important conversations. Not like, oh, let's sit and talk, and no young person would love that, but but just about, hey, what, this is what it is, and I felt this, and what do you feel? Kind of conversations, I think, can go a long way.
Right. I think, that sort of brings us to a lovely conclusion for this podcast. And so we've been through the issues here. We've looked at certain solutions. We've looked at what adults can do and how we can constructively engage with children, teach them to critically evaluate what they see online, and also engage responsibly, both on the part of adults as well as children, youngsters. Thank you so much, Dr. Meghna and Sanuti, for being here today and taking us through this. Really, I mean, I think it's taking us through the ringer, because these are questions that every home is now debating. Thank you for bringing some clarity and giving us some guidance on what we could do if this were to happen in our homes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.